Lord Voldemort. Voldemort's Boggart is never shown in the books, but its likely form is central to understanding his psychology. Voldemort is defined by one obsession: conquering death. His very name, flight from death, reveals that his greatest fear is mortality itself. A Boggart confronting him would almost certainly take the shape of a corpse, perhaps his own lifeless body. This would echo the mirror image of what Harry fears in Dementors: the presence of despair, absence of hope, and ultimately death. But there is another possibility. Voldemort's Boggart could also take the form of powerless, ordinary Tom Riddle, stripped of his magic, his followers, and his aura of terror. We know from Dumbledore's reflections that Tom's entire life was built on rejecting his Muggle heritage and masking his origins. To see himself as a weak, unwanted child again might terrify him as much as death itself. Either way, Voldemort's Boggart would reveal a man consumed by denial, not just fear of dying, but fear of being forgotten, reduced, or ordinary.
Severus Snape. We never see Snape's Boggart in canon, but his life story gives us strong clues. Snape is defined by guilt, regret, and unhealed trauma connected to Lily Potter. His Boggart could therefore manifest in two possible ways. The first is Lily's dead body, echoing Molly Weasley's Boggart of seeing her family lifeless. For Snape, Lily's death is the wound that never closed, the very reason he bound himself to Dumbledore and agreed to protect Harry. The second possibility is more psychological: Lily alive but turning away from him in disgust or indifference. Snape's Patronus, a doe, shows how his entire identity was chained to her memory. A Boggart that embodies her rejection would symbolize his deepest shame, that his choices and cruelty drove her away forever. Unlike characters who fear external monsters or authority figures, Snape's Boggart would be intimate and devastating, tied to the core of his existence.
Albus Dumbledore. Dumbledore's Boggart is not explicitly described in the books, but Rowling gives us important hints. In Prisoner of Azkaban, when Lupin asks Dumbledore what form a Boggart would take for him, he avoids the question, calling it a rather personal matter. Rowling later clarified that Dumbledore's greatest fear was the corpse of his sister, Ariana. Her tragic death, caused during a duel between Albus, Aberforth, and Grindelwald, haunted him for the rest of his life. A Boggart for Dumbledore would almost certainly manifest as Ariana's body, fragile, lifeless, and a constant reminder of the consequences of his ambition and recklessness. This ties directly into his deepest wound, his guilt for prioritizing dreams of power over his family. Unlike many other characters, Dumbledore's fear is not external danger or death itself, but the crushing weight of remorse. The Boggart embodies not what he dreads will happen, but what has already happened and can never be undone.
Neville Longbottom. Neville's Boggart appears during Professor Lupin's defense against the dark arts lesson in Prisoner of Azkaban. When the wardrobe opens, it takes the form of Professor Snape, the teacher who terrified Neville more than any dark creature. This might seem almost comical compared to the Boggarts of others, but it reflects something very real: Neville's lifelong struggle with self-doubt and authority. Snape constantly belittled him, making him feel inadequate and clumsy. For a child who already feared he was a disappointment to his family, Snape became the embodiment of humiliation and failure. Lupin cleverly instructed Neville to use the ridiculous spell by dressing Snape in his grandmother's clothes, complete with vulture hat and handbag. This was more than comic relief, it was an early hint at Neville's courage. By confronting the figure that crushed his confidence, he began taking his first steps towards becoming the leader he grows into by the end of the series. Neville's Boggart reminds us that fears don't always have to be monsters. Sometimes the scariest thing is the person who makes us feel powerless.
Molly Weasley. Molly Weasley's Boggart is one of the most harrowing in the series because it reflects a parent's worst nightmare: In Order of the Phoenix, Harry discovers her in Grimmauld Place, attempting to repel a Boggart that keeps shifting forms. One moment, it is Ron lying dead, then Harry, then her other children in turn. Each transformation shows Molly's deepest fear, losing her loved ones violently in the war against Voldemort. This Boggart is especially significant because it highlights the cost of the conflict on ordinary families. Molly is not a warrior by nature. She is a mother, protector, and homemaker. Her fear isn't abstract like Voldemort's or rooted in guilt like Dumbledore's. It is immediate, visceral, and tied to the people she loves most.
Ron Weasley. Ron's Boggart appears during Lupin's lesson in Prisoner of Azkaban. When the wardrobe opens, it transforms into a giant spider, a clear reference to Ron's arachnophobia. This fear traces back to a childhood incident where Fred and George once turned his teddy bear into a spider, scarring him for life. While it may seem straightforward, Ron's Boggart actually reveals something deeper about his character. Unlike Harry, whose fear is rooted in trauma, or Hermione, whose fear stems from failure, Ron's spider represents vulnerability and helplessness. As the sixth child in a large family, Ron often feels overshadowed by his siblings' talents and accomplishments. The spider, overwhelming in size and threatening in appearance, reflects how Ron often perceives the world, as something larger than himself, where he struggles to stand out. The use of ridiculous to make the spider lose its legs shows his attempt to cut down those overwhelming forces, turning them into something he can finally handle.
Harry Potter. When Harry first encounters a Boggart in Lupin's class, it does not take the shape of Voldemort, as many might expect. Instead, it becomes a Dementor. This is crucial. Dementors represent not only fear itself, but the unbearable memory of loss and despair. Harry's greatest terror is not death, but the return of the soul-crushing hopelessness he feels in their presence. It is tied directly to his trauma, hearing his mother's screams as she dies every time a Dementor approaches. This is why Harry's Boggart is one of the most layered in the series. It reflects his unique vulnerability. Unlike his classmates, he has experienced tragedy from infancy. For Harry, the Dementor isn't just a frightening creature. It is the embodiment of reliving grief and helplessness over and over. Lupin intervenes during the lesson, fearing that the Boggart could overwhelm Harry in front of the class, which shows how personal and dangerous this fear truly is.
Hermione Granger. Hermione's Boggart appears during the same defense against the dark arts lesson with Lupin, in Prisoner of Azkaban, though it is only shown in the book, not the film. Instead of a monster or death scene, her Boggart is Professor McGonagall, telling her that she has failed all her exams. Reflects Hermione's deepest anxiety, inadequacy. For Hermione, knowledge and achievement are her way of asserting control in a world that once saw her as an outsider, a muggle-born who didn't belong.